I am Jack Harris, the night watchman on one of the Texas oil rigs. What I'm about to tell you is a story that repeats itself in my nightmares every night. A story that might be hard to believe, but one that I've experienced with every fiber of my being. It all started on an ordinary night in June. The weather was hot and humid, as we expected on the Texas coast. As usual, I started my shift at 10 p.m. The oil rig in the darkness of night looked like a giant monster with its red lights blinking in the dark. The first hours of the shift were quiet, as always. The sound of the waves of the Gulf of Mexico and the faint roar of machinery were the only sounds breaking the silence of the night. I was doing my usual rounds, climbing up the metal stairs and peering into all corners of the platform. It was around 2 a.m. when I sensed the first signs of something unusual. I thought I heard a sound coming from the northern part of the platform, a sound like metal being scratched. At first, I thought maybe one of the pieces of equipment was malfunctioning. I went towards the sound with my flashlight. When I got there, I saw nothing, but I had a strange feeling, as if someone or something was watching me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I told myself, "Jack, you're imagining things. All these years of night work are finally affecting your brain." But that feeling wouldn't leave me. I decided to go back to the control room and check the security cameras. On the way back, I heard another sound. This time the sound was clearer, like a muffled growl coming from the throat of a huge animal. My heart started racing. I put my hand on my gun and slowly moved towards the sound. Suddenly, something moved from the corner of my eye. I quickly turned and shone the flashlight in that direction. For a moment, I saw something I'll never forget. A pair of glowing yellow eyes were staring at me in the darkness, eyes that didn't belong to any normal human or animal. Before I could react, the creature disappeared from my sight with incredible speed. With shaky legs, I returned to the control room. I checked all the cameras but saw nothing unusual. I thought maybe I was hallucinating, but those eyes, they seemed so real. Until the end of my shift, every sound made me jump. When the sun rose and my colleagues came for the day shift, I felt relieved, but I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Days passed and I tried to forget that night, but every night when darkness fell, that fear would come back to me. My colleagues had noticed the change in my behavior. Bobby, one of the engineers, asked me one day, "Jack, is something wrong? You've been looking pretty upset these days." I didn't know what to say. How could I tell them that I thought some strange creature was prowling around the oil rig? They'd surely think I'd gone crazy. So I just said, "It's nothing, Bobby. I just haven't been sleeping well lately." But the truth was, I was afraid to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those yellow eyes staring at me. A week later, on another dark and humid Texas night, I heard those sounds again. This time louder and clearer, the sound of snarling and growling, along with the sound of claws scraping on metal. My heart was about to burst out of my chest. With trembling hands, I picked up my radio and called the Coastal Control Center. "This is Jack Harris, night watchman on Platform 7. I think there's something here, something dangerous." Static came from the radio, and then the familiar voice of Tom, the control center operator. "Jack, what do you mean?" "What dangerous thing?" I didn't know how to explain. "I don't know, Tom. I hear sounds, like it's a big animal, but no animal could be here, right?" Tom tried to calm me down. "Jack, it's probably just the sound of equipment. Do you want me to send a team to check?" Before I could answer, I heard a sound behind me, a sound that made my hair stand on end. I slowly turned around and there it was. The creature I saw wasn't described in any biology book or legend. A huge body covered in black, coarse hair, hands and feet that oscillated between human and wolf. And those eyes, the same yellow eyes I'd seen in my nightmares. The radio fell from my hand. I could hear Tom calling me, "Jack! Jack! Can you hear me?" But I couldn't answer. My whole body was paralyzed with fear. The creature was slowly approaching me. I could smell its hot, foul breath. In a moment, I came to my senses. I started running. With all the speed I could muster, I ran up the metal stairs. I could hear the creature's growl and claws behind me. I reached the upper floor and threw myself into the control room. I locked the door and stood behind it. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I could hear the door being scratched. The creature was trying to get in. There I was, with only a metal door separating me from that monster.
If you enjoyed it so far, please hit the subscribe button if you liked the video.
I don't know how long I stayed in that state. Maybe a few minutes, maybe a few hours. Time had lost its meaning. The only thing I knew was that if that door broke, I was dead. Suddenly I heard the siren. The Coast Guard helicopter was approaching. The creature seemed to realize this. I heard a loud growl and then silence. When the rescue team arrived, they found me huddled in the corner of the control room, shaking. The control room door had deep scratches that no normal human or animal could have made. They took me ashore. I was hospitalized for days. The doctors said I was in shock, but I knew what I had seen. Now months have passed since that night. I no longer work on oil rigs. I can't go back there. But every night when I look at the sky and see the full moon, I remember that creature. A creature that was neither fully human nor fully animal. Some nights when the wind blows, I think I hear a howl from afar. And I know that creature is still out there, on the Texas oil rigs, waiting for its next victim. But no one believes me. They say I've been hallucinating. They say the stress of night work and loneliness has made me imagine such things. But I know what I saw. And I know that creature, that werewolf, is real. Now, whenever I hear news about workers disappearing on oil rigs, my heart sinks. I know he has hunted again, and I know that no one will believe it. But you who are reading this story, take my warning seriously. If one night you're on the Texas oil rigs and you hear a growl, if you see yellow eyes in the darkness, run. Run and don't look back, because he's there, waiting for a chance to hunt. I, Jack Harris, give you this warning. Believe it or not, the decision is yours. But know that on moonlit nights, on the Texas oil rigs, something more than oil and gas is flowing. Something that's more terrifying than your darkest nightmares. And now every night, when I turn off the lights and go to bed, I pray that I won't see those yellow eyes in my sleep. I pray that I won't hear that terrible growl. But I know as long as that creature roams freely on the oil rigs, no one is safe. Maybe one day someone will find this creature and prove the truth. Maybe one day the world will understand what's happening on those dark, humid Texas nights. But until that day, I can only warn and hope that someone will listen to me. And to you, dear reader, I say, be careful, because in the darkness of night, in places you least expect, you may encounter something that will turn all your beliefs upside down. And if one day on the Texas oil rigs, you hear a howl, know that he's there, and maybe you'll be his next victim. But my story doesn't end here. After that terrifying night, my life changed completely. I couldn't live like before. Every little sound startled me. Every shadow in the darkness brought the image of that creature to my mind. I decided to look for answers. I couldn't believe I was the only one who had experienced such a thing. So I started researching. I went to libraries, talked to myth researchers, even looked for other witnesses who might have seen something similar. On this journey, I met strange people. People who claimed to have seen supernatural creatures. Some of them seemed crazy, but others, their stories were strangely familiar. One day, I met an old man named William. He had worked on oil rigs years ago. When I told him my story, the color drained from his face. With a trembling voice, he said, "Son, you're not alone. I saw it too, years ago." William told me how one night he had seen something similar to what I had seen. Like me, he had lived with this secret for years, without daring to tell anyone. But William had more information. He told me that this creature, this werewolf, is as old as the oil industry in Texas itself. There are legends about workers who disappeared in the early 20th century. Stories of savage attacks that were never solved. William believed that this creature was some kind of curse, a curse that was released with the first oil wells in Texas. He said, "We're pulling something out of the depths of the earth that shouldn't be. And this creature, this monster, it's nature's revenge." William's words made me think. Could he be right? Had we, with our own hands, opened a door to a dark and unknown world? With these thoughts, I decided to return to the oil rigs, not for work, but for research. I wanted to understand where this creature came from and why it was here. One moonlit night, I made my way to one of the platforms. My heart was racing and my hands were shaking, but I was determined. I had to find out the truth. I searched the platform for hours. Every sound made me jump, but there was no sign of that creature. I was starting to lose hope when suddenly my eye caught something strange. In a corner of the platform, where usually no one went, there were markings etched into the metal. Markings that looked like no writing I had ever seen before. When I got closer, I realized that these markings were old, much older than the platform itself. At that moment, I heard a sound behind me, a sound I knew very well. I slowly turned around and saw it. The same creature, the same werewolf. But this time, my fear was mixed with curiosity. The creature wasn't approaching me. It seemed like it recognized me too. For a moment, we looked into each other's eyes, and in that moment, I saw something in its gaze. Something like pain, sadness, I don't know. Suddenly, the creature turned and jumped off the platform with incredible speed, disappearing into the dark waters of the Gulf. I was left with thousands of questions. What were those markings? Why didn't the creature attack me this time? And most importantly, was this creature really a monster or something else? Now, I go to the shore every night and stare at the oil rigs. I know he's out there, and I know our story isn't over yet. Maybe one day I'll understand the truth. Maybe one day I'll be able to uncover the secret of this creature and its connection to the oil rigs. But until that day, I continue to warn and tell my story, because I know that on moonlit nights on the Texas oil rigs, something is lurking in the shadows, something that's waiting to tell its story. And you, dear reader, if you ever come to Texas and want to visit the oil rigs, remember that sometimes the truth is stranger than what we see. And sometimes the monsters we fear might not be as monstrous as we think. But take my warning seriously, because in the darkness of night, where the light of the lamps doesn't reach, something is waiting. Something that might one day tell us its real story. Until that day, I, Jack Harris, continue my search, looking for a truth that's hidden in the depths of the dark waters of the Gulf of Mexico and in the shadow of the oil rigs. And maybe one day, you too will become part of this story. So be careful and stay alert, because on moonlit nights on the Texas oil rigs, anything is possible.